Well, good morning. Welcome to day 6 of our reading plan through the 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus. Today's reading came from the 1st Timothy chapter 2, verses 8 through 15. And to get us started with today's meditational thought, I'd like to pull in a passage from the book of Genesis. From Genesis chapter 1, and a couple of verses. The first verse from verse 27. This is where we have the creation narrative of God creating humankind. Verse 27 says, "So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them." And then if we drop down to the end of the chapter, down to verse 31, we read, "God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 6th day." So, welcome to day 6 in our reading plan. But you don't have to get very far in today's reading without realizing that today's reading is a pretty interesting reading. Often groups will interpret today's reading just on face value of the words that they read, but it's really important that we not just read the text, but we also understand the context of the passage. Remember, Paul was speaking to Timothy. He was writing to him about the issue of false teachers. That's the backdrop to chapter 2. And most scholars believe that Timothy was still in Ephesus at a time when Christianity could barely be called a movement. Historians tell us that there was a dominant religion in Ephesus at the time. It had the biggest temple in the area, and it was a female-only cult, and it was called the Temple of Artemis. And Artemis was a female deity. Romans referred to her as Diana. Within this religion, only women were priests, and they kept men in their place. So if you take that into consideration, Paul seems to be addressing the need to assure that Christianity doesn't simply become some type of cult along the lines of the worship of Artemis. This seems much more consistent with the teachings that we read from Paul regarding how differences are dissolved when it comes to faith in Christ. For instance, Galatians chapter 3, verse 27 says, "As many of you as were baptized into Christ have clothed yourself with Christ. There is no longer Jew or Greek. There is no longer slave or free. There is no longer male or female. For all of you are one in Christ Jesus." So whether we are male or female, we are all part of Abraham's offspring with the same equal footing at the cross of Christ. I particularly like the way Dr. N.T. Wright translates these verses. He writes it this way. "So this is what I want. The man should pray in every place, lifting up holy hands with no anger or disputing. In the same way, the women, too, should clothe themselves in an appropriate manner, modestly and sensibly. They should not go in for elaborate hairstyles or gold or pearls or expensive clothes. Instead, as is appropriate for women who profess to be godly, they should adorn themselves with good works. They must be allowed to study undisturbed, in full submission to God. I'm not saying that women should teach men or try to dictate to them. They should be left undisturbed. Adam was created first, you see, and then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and fell into trespass. She will, however, be kept safe through the process of childbirth if she continues in faith, love, and holiness and prudence. You see, Dr. Wright is addressing this from an interesting perspective, in the fact that the focus is to be on learning and growing as a disciple of Jesus Christ for men and women, and that our focus should be upon doing good works in the name of Christ. But going even further than that, he brings up the interesting illustration of Adam and Eve in the garden, that Eve was deceived. She didn't know what she was doing, but Adam did. So there's judgment on both sides. So consider these questions as we conclude today's meditational moment. In what ways does Dr. Wright's interpretation impact your view of men and women in the church? Second question. In what way is your understanding of 1 Timothy 2 influenced by the culture in which we live? Third question. What other thoughts does this text bring to your mind as you consider the way in which God is speaking to you? Well, I hope you have a good day in this new normal, being the church in changing times. Go in peace, and God bless.